The Galactic Academy's lecture hall hummed with the low murmur of students adjusting their holoscreens and preparing for another lesson. Mia Lee, the Academy's only human cadet, sat near the back, scribbling notes into a well-worn notebook. Unlike the other students, whose devices seamlessly recorded lectures and translated alien dialects, Mia preferred the tactile feel of writing things down. The Academy prided itself on fostering the brightest minds from every corner of the galaxy, but it often felt as though being human made her stand out in all the wrong ways. As Professor Xylox entered the hall, the students fell silent. He was a towering figure, his deep blue exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial lights. His forearms moved with precision as he arranged a series of holographic diagrams, each detailing the complex inner workings of a standard galactic starship. Xylox's voice, rich and resonant, reverberated through the chamber. Today, we address maintenance protocols for the intricate wiring systems aboard our interstellar vessels, Xylox announced, his tone carrying a hint of disdain. Some species have evolved sufficiently to handle such complex tasks, while others, his gaze swept across the room, lingering pointedly on Mia, remain dependent on obsolete, primitive methods. Mia's grip on her pen tightened. She could feel the eyes of her fellow cadets flicker toward her, some openly smirking. She forced herself to keep her focus on the professor, determined not to let his words unnerve her. Xylox continued, his mandibles clicking with irritation as he pulled up a simulation of a starship's wiring schematic. Your assignment for this week: access the maintenance tunnels, assess the power grid, and restore any disrupted connections. You may utilize your species-approved maintenance methods, but be warned, any deviation from Academy standards will result in immediate failure. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall as the challenge set in. The ship's wiring system was notoriously complex, designed with layers of interwoven circuits that branched out like a spider's web. Even the most advanced robotic systems struggled to navigate the cramped tunnels. Mia considered the assignment carefully. She knew that traditional robots wouldn't work, at least not without risking further damage to the delicate conduits. Professor, one of the other cadets, a three-eyed Thranxian named Quar, raised a hand. Surely even the most advanced systems will have difficulty reaching the lower conduits. What about deploying microdrones? Xylox's antennae flicked with disdain. Microdrones, though efficient, are prone to interference within the ship's electromagnetic fields. Only the most advanced models can bypass this, and even they are prone to malfunction in prolonged operations. Creativity will be essential. Mia took a deep breath, formulating an idea. Her thoughts drifted back to her days in the engineering labs back on Earth, where she'd worked with behavioral training for small animals. Could it work here? The Academy permitted students to use whatever resources they deemed fit, as long as the result adhered to Academy standards. Maybe, just maybe, her idea could work. She had two rats, Pixel and Bolt, that had been smuggled aboard in her personal belongings. Originally, they were meant to be companions, a reminder of the home she'd left behind. But they were more than just pets. They were highly trained lab rats from an Earth-based research facility, accustomed to navigating intricate mazes. Mia had spent countless hours teaching them to respond to commands, rewarding them with treats when they succeeded. The memory of Pixel squeezing through a narrow gap to retrieve a microchip suddenly sparked an idea. Before she could dwell on it further, Xylox's voice snapped her back to the present. Earth creatures, he sneered, seemingly reading her thoughts. The most useless biological entities in the galaxy. Their domesticated animals are unfit for anything beyond menial companionship. Pathetic. Mia felt a rush of anger, but she held her tongue. Arguing with Xylox would only make her more of a target. Instead, she decided to take his insult as motivation. If she could train Pixel and Bolt to navigate the ship's wiring tunnels, they could deliver the repair components more efficiently than any robotic system. It would be risky, but if it worked, it would prove Xylox wrong in the most satisfying way possible. After class, Mia hurried back to her quarters. The Academy's dormitory wing was a sprawling labyrinth of metal corridors, each one leading to a modest private room. Once inside, she gently lifted the lid of a small crate in the corner. Inside, Pixel and Bolt stirred, their whiskers twitching as they sniffed the air. "Hey guys," Mia whispered, stroking Bolt's silky fur. "I've got a new challenge for you. Think you're up for it?" Pixel immediately climbed under her hand, curious and energetic as always. Bull, slightly more cautious, poked his head out and waited for reassurance. Mia pulled a handful of nutrient pellets from her pocket, offering them as a reward. Both rats eagerly accepted, chattering in excitement. She spent the evening setting up a makeshift training course, replicating the narrow passageways and wire junctions of the ship's inner network. Using string and small beads, she mimicked the tangled wiring, guiding Pixel and Bolt through the pathways with her voice commands. It was slow at first, and the rats seemed unsure of the new setup. But Mia's patience and persistence paid off. Within a few hours, they began responding accurately, dragging small pieces of wire from one point to another. Her confidence grew as she watched them work. If they could handle the model, maybe they could tackle the real thing. Mia adjusted the small harness she'd made for each rat, equipping them with tiny cameras linked to her tablet. Through the screen, she watched the world from their perspective, a dark, cramped maze illuminated by their keen, curious eyes. Late into the night, as Mia fine-tuned the training, she couldn't help but imagine the look on Xylox's face when her Earth creatures outperformed his prized robotic systems. The challenge wasn't just about fixing the ship. It was about proving that ingenuity and heart could triumph over arrogance and prejudice. Mia glanced down at the rats, who now sat grooming each other, oblivious to the daunting task ahead. She smiled, giving them each a gentle pat. "We're going to show them, guys. We'll prove that even the smallest Earthlings can make a big difference." With the plan set and her resolve strengthened, Mia lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling with a sense of determination she hadn't felt since arriving at the academy. Tomorrow she would set the plan into motion. Tomorrow, Xylox would learn that underestimating humans and their clever animal companions was a mistake. Mia woke up to the sound of the Academy's automated alarm echoing through the dormitory corridor. The sterile metallic walls amplified the beeping noise, making it impossible to ignore. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, feeling the weight of the previous night's training session in her bones. Pixel and Bolt were already awake, pacing around in their crate as if sensing the tension in the air. Today was the first day of the official maintenance task, and Mia knew she had to be prepared for anything. She quickly dressed in her Academy-issued uniform, a fitted jumpsuit with various pockets for tools and communication devices. Her hair was tied back in a tight ponytail, and her face bore a determined expression. Grabbing a small bag containing the custom-made harnesses for Pixel and Bolt, she whispered to them, "Today's the day, guys. You're going to show everyone what you can do." The training course she had set up the night before had been a success, but the real maintenance tunnels would be far more complex. The ship's wiring system was a labyrinth of conduits, each one carrying vital electrical currents to different sections of the vessel. A single misstep could disrupt the entire system, and Mia knew that one mistake could spell disaster, not just for her grade, but for her credibility as a cadet. As she walked through the corridor toward the maintenance bay, she could hear the voices of her fellow cadets echoing through the hall. The alien students had formed small groups, each one huddled around advanced robotic drones equipped with intricate tools and scanning systems. The air buzzed with the sound of calibrating machines and the whirring of robotic limbs. Mia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her simple, non-mechanical setup. While the other cadets had sleek, technologically advanced robots, she only had her 2 rats and her wits. But she reminded herself that Pixel and Bolt had successfully navigated the practice course. They were ready. Stepping into the maintenance bay, Mia caught sight of Professor Xylox standing at the front of the room, his arms crossed over his broad chest. His 4 eyes scanned the room, a smug expression playing on his angular features. He watched as each team activated their robotic systems, the mechanical limbs extending and retracting as the robots prepared to enter the wiring tunnels. Mia approached her designated workstation, setting down her bag and carefully lifting Pixel and Bolt from the crate. She placed them on the table, attaching the small harnesses equipped with miniature cameras and communication devices. The rats remained calm, their tiny black eyes darting around, taking in the surroundings. Xylox's voice boomed through the room. "Cadets, you have precisely 2 hours to locate and repair the disrupted wiring circuits in your assigned sections. Remember, any deviations from standard protocols will be noted and penalized. Now, proceed." Mia took a deep breath and glanced down at Pixel and Bolt. "You're ready," she whispered. her fingers gently stroking their soft fur. "Remember the commands. Left, right, up, down, just like last night." With a final nod, she opened the access panel to the maintenance tunnel, revealing a narrow, dark passageway lined with tightly packed wires and cables. The tunnel was barely large enough to fit a small robot, let alone a human. Mia carefully placed Pixel at the entrance and pressed the activation button on the camera harness. The tiny screen on her handheld device flickered to life, displaying the rat's point of view in grainy black and white. Pixel's perspective revealed a tangle of wires stretching in all directions. Mia issued a soft command, "Left," and watched as Pixel carefully navigated through the maze, his small body weaving in and out of the cables. Bolt remained on the table, awaiting his turn. Across the room, other cadets were immersed in their tasks, their robotic drones buzzing and whirring as they extended mechanical arms to access deeper circuits. Xylar the three-eyed Thrinkison glanced over at Mia's workstation and snickered. "Oh, look," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The human brought her pets to do her homework." Several cadets laughed, and Mia felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. But she kept her focus on the screen, watching as Pixel continued to navigate deeper into the tunnel. The camera feed shook slightly as Pixel squeezed through a narrow gap, his tiny paws gripping the wires to steady himself. Mia's heart pounded as she noticed a section of frayed wires sparking dangerously. "Pixel, stop," she commanded, her voice calm but firm. The rat obeyed, his small body freezing in place. Mia took a deep breath and examined the screen, assessing the damage. The wires were tightly knotted, and the sparks threatened to ignite the surrounding insulation. "All right, Pixel," she said softly. "We need to reroute the wires. Stay calm." Using a small joystick connected to the camera harness, Mia guided Pixel's tiny paw toward a nearby tool, a miniature clamp she had attached to his harness. Pixel gripped the clamp and slowly pulled it toward the sparking wires. With meticulous precision, he bit down on the wire, holding it in place as Mia activated a tiny welding device built into the harness. The screen flickered as the sparks intensified, but Mia remained calm, her hands steady as she guided Pixel through the delicate operation. Beads of sweat formed on her brow, and she could feel Xylox's gaze burning into her from across the room. When the last wire was secured, Mia exhaled a long, shaky breath. Pixel had done it. The circuit was restored, and the sparking had stopped. Mia allowed herself a small smile of relief as she watched Pixel retreat back through the tunnel, his tiny paws scurrying over the wires with practiced ease. Once Pixel was safely back on the table, Mia removed his harness and set Bolt down, attaching the same device to him. "Your turn," she said, giving him a reassuring pat. Bolt's task was more complex. He would need to navigate to the far end of the tunnel, where a broken fuse awaited replacement. Mia had studied the wiring schematic extensively the night before, memorizing every junction and intersection. She knew that if Bolt missed a single turn, he could end up tangled in a web of live wires. As Bolt entered the tunnel, Mia's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Forward, Bolt. Straight ahead." On the screen, the camera feed bobbed as Bolt moved forward, his whiskers twitching as he sniffed the air. Mia clenched her jaw, her eyes never leaving the screen. The fuse was just ahead, barely visible behind a mess of cables. "Bolt, stop!" Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Bolt paused, his small body tense. Mia swallowed hard and took a deep breath. This was the critical moment. If Bolt could replace the fuse without disturbing the surrounding wires, he would complete the task perfectly. Mia's hands moved swiftly, guiding Bolt's tiny paw to the replacement fuse clipped to his harness. "Now, Bolt." Carefully, Bolt's tiny claws grasped the fuse, pulling it free from the harness and maneuvering it into the designated slot. The camera feed shook slightly as he adjusted the angle, aligning the fuse with the damaged socket. Mia's entire body was tense, her heart hammering in her chest as she watched Bolt secure the fuse. When it clicked into place, the screen briefly went dark before the camera feed stabilized, showing the now repaired circuit. Mia's shoulders sagged with relief. "Good job, Bolt," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. "Come on back." As Bolt scurried back through the tunnel, Mia leaned back against her chair, her body finally relaxing. Across the room, Xylox stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The other cadets were still struggling with their robots. several drones tangled in the wiring or short-circuited from electromagnetic interference. Mia gently lifted Bolt from the tunnel, removing his harness and placing him back in the crate beside Pixel. The two rats curled up together, their small bodies nestling close, completely oblivious to the feat they had just accomplished. Mia wiped her brow, her gaze fixed on Xylox. The professor's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment Mia thought she saw something resembling grudging respect in his expression. But the moment passed, and Xylox turned away, his face once again a mask of indifference. Mia glanced down at Pixel and Bolt, a sense of triumph swelling in her chest. She had done it. Despite the odds, despite the taunts and mockery, she had proven that even Earth creatures had a place in the Galactic Academy. And she wasn't finished yet. There was still more to come. Mia sat cross-legged on her bunk, her eyes fixed on the small screen displaying the live feed from the ship's maintenance tunnels. Pixel and Bolt were back in their crate, sleeping soundly after the exhausting task they had just completed. Mia watched the playback of their performance, scrutinizing every movement, every hesitation. The repairs they had accomplished were minor compared to the critical circuits located deeper within the ship's wiring system, and she knew that the next task would be far more complex. Professor Xylox had made no comment about her unconventional methods during the inspection, but Mia could feel his eyes on her throughout the exercise. His silence was unsettling. He was the type to boast about his superior knowledge and advanced technology, and the fact that he had said nothing about her Earth-trained animals spoke volumes. Mia suspected that he was planning something, and the knot of tension in her stomach tightened at the thought. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the screen and the faint glow of the distant stars outside her window. Mia's mind was still racing, replaying the moment when Bolt had successfully secured the fuse. It had been a close call, but they had done it. Still, something felt off. Her communicator buzzed on the desk, and she reached for it. The screen flashed with a notification. A direct message from Xylar. "You think you're clever with your little Earth pets," the message read. "Wait until tomorrow. Xylox has a surprise for you." Mia's jaw clenched. Xylar had always been a thorn in her side, a bully who thrived on belittling her whenever possible. But his words carried an ominous weight. What surprise? What could Xylars possibly have in store for her? The next morning, the Academy's announcement system echoed through the halls, summoning all cadets to the main training chamber. Mia hurriedly dressed, securing Pixel and Bolt in their crate and strapping the communication devices to her belt. The tension was palpable as she joined the other cadets, each one whispering about the new challenge Xylox had planned. The training chamber was vast, a cavernous room filled with holographic projectors, simulated environments, and advanced machinery. Xylox stood in the center of the room, his four arms crossed over his chest, his mandibles clicking in what could only be described as a smug expression. Beside him stood Xylar, his three eyes glinting with barely contained excitement. "Today," Xylox began, his voice booming through the chamber, "we will be conducting a live demonstration of advanced maintenance techniques. Each cadet will be assigned a specific section of the ship's wiring system to repair. However, there is a new element to today's task." Xylox gestured to the large screen behind him, which displayed a complex, tangled schematic of the ship's wiring system. The circuits were highlighted in red, indicating a series of critical faults. "These circuits," Xylox continued, "are located in the lower maintenance tunnels, far more extensive and dangerous than the ones you worked on yesterday. The temperature is significantly higher, and the electromagnetic interference is strong enough to disrupt most robotic systems." Mia's eyes widened. The lower tunnels were notorious for their extreme conditions. Even the Academy's most advanced drones struggled to function in such an environment. She glanced down at Pixel and Bolt, who were now peering up at her from the crate, their tiny eyes blinking curiously. Bucks's expression darkened as he continued. "Due to the increased difficulty, each cadet will be granted access to a new piece of equipment, an electromagnetic stabilizer designed to protect robotic systems from interference." A group of assistants wheeled out a series of sleek, silver devices, each one about the size of a small suitcase. The cadets rushed forward to claim theirs, each one eager to test the new equipment. But as Mia stepped forward, Xylox raised a hand, stopping her. "Not you, Cadet Lee," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Since you insist on relying on your Earth creatures, you will complete the task without the stabilizer. Mia's stomach dropped. But, sir, the interference in the lower tunnels is precisely why we are using the stabilizers, Psylocke said, his 4 eyes glaring at her. But since you believe your primitive methods are sufficient, you will not require one. Consider this an opportunity to prove your faith in your pets. Xylar snickered, nudging the cadet beside him. Oh, this is going to be good. Lee's fists clenched at her sides, her mind racing. Without the stabilizer, Pixel and Bolt would be vulnerable to the electromagnetic interference. The camera feeds would be unstable, and the communication systems might short out entirely, but she had no choice. Xylox had set her up to fail, and the only way to beat him was to prove him wrong. Back in her workstation, Mia knelt down beside the crate, her heart pounding. Pixel and Bolt watched her intently, their small bodies tense, as if they could sense her unease. "We're gonna do this," Mia whispered, her hands trembling as she adjusted the harnesses. "You two are stronger than they think. We just have to stay focused." She placed Pixel at the entrance of the lower maintenance tunnel, the heat radiating from the metal walls in suffocating waves. The temperature was intense, the air thick and heavy. Mia activated the camera feed, but the image was already starting to glitch, static distorting the view. "Stay calm, Pixel," she said, her voice low and steady. "Move forward, straight ahead." Pixeler advanced, his small paws pattering against the metal floor as he maneuvered through the tight passageway. The camera feed flickered, and Mia's heart skipped a beat as the image briefly cut out. "Pixel, stop," she said quickly, but there was no response. The feed remained black, and the communication link buzzed with static. "Oh, come on," Mia muttered, adjusting the controls. But nothing happened. Panic began to claw at her chest. If she couldn't see Pixel, how could she guide him? What if he got lost or trapped in the tunnel? "Mia," Xylar's smug voice echoed from across the room. "Having trouble with your little rodents?" Mia gritted her teeth, refusing to look at him. Instead, she focused on the crate where Bolt was watching the tunnel entrance, his tiny body trembling. "Pling, Bolt," Mia said, her voice thick with desperation. "I need you to go in, find Pixel, bring him back." Bolt hesitated, his small ears twitching, but then he stepped forward, his gaze resolute. Mia quickly attached the harness to him and placed him at the tunnel entrance. "Stay calm, Bolt," she said, her voice wavering. "You can do this." The camera feed flickered to life, showing Bolt's perspective as he moved through the tunnel. The temperature gauge on the screen spiked dangerously high, and Mia's hands shook as she watched Bolt crawl deeper into the labyrinth of wires. The electromagnetic interference caused the feed to cut in and out, but then, through the static, Mia saw a flash of white fur. Pixel. He was tangled in a nest of cables, his tiny paws caught in a snarl of wires. Mia's heart raced as she guided Bolt closer, her voice firm and clear. "Bolt, free him, carefully." Bolt moved closer, using his teeth to gnaw through the cables, trapping Pixel's paws. Mia held her breath as the seconds stretched into minutes. Sweat dripped down her brow, her eyes never leaving the screen. Finally, Bolt managed to free Pixel, and the two rats began their slow, perilous journey back through the tunnel. When they finally emerged, Mia dropped to her knees, scooping them up in her arms, tears of relief streaming down her face. Across the room, Xylox watched her with a sneer. "Impressive, Cadet Lee," he said, his voice cold and patronizing. "But let's see how your pets fare in tomorrow's final challenge. The deepest tunnels, the highest temperatures, and no harnesses." Mia's heart sank. Xylox wasn't finished with her yet, and the real test was still to come. Mia sat alone in her dormitory, her knees drawn up to her chest as she stared at the small crate where Pixel and Bolt rested. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the stars outside the window. The silence was suffocating, and the weight of Xylox's words pressed down on her like a leaden shroud. The final challenge would be tomorrow. The deepest tunnels, the highest temperatures, and no harnesses. Mia's hands trembled as she reached into the crate and gently lifted Pixel, cradling him in her palms. The little rat nuzzled her thumb, his whiskers twitching as if sensing her distress. Bolt remained in the crate, his small body curled up tightly as though he, too, could feel the impending danger. Mia swallowed hard, fighting back the sting of tears. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "How can I send you both in there without the harnesses? You won't be able to hear me. You won't know what to do." She closed her eyes, forcing herself to take a slow, deep breath. Panic wouldn't help her now. She had to think. There had to be a way to get through this without risking their lives. But how? A soft chime echoed through the room, signaling an incoming communication. Mia placed Pixel back in the crate and moved to her workstation, her heart pounding as she activated the screen. Xylar's smirking face appeared, his 3 eyes glinting with malicious delight. "Well, well, Lee," Xylar drawled, leaning back in his chair. "Heard you're having some trouble with your little Earth pets. Shame, really. Maybe you should just give up now. No one would blame you." Mia clenched her jaw, her hands curling into fists. "What do you want, Xylar?" "Oh, nothing," he said, feigning innocence. "Just thought you should know that Xylox has increased the difficulty for tomorrow's challenge. The interference in those lower tunnels is strong enough to fry even the best robotic systems. And your little rodents? They don't stand a chance." Mia's pulse quickened. "How do you know that?" Xylar's smirk widened. "Because I helped him design the course. Enjoy your last night with your precious pets, Lee. Might be the last time you see them alive." The screen went black and Mia's stomach twisted. Xylar had been working with Xylox all along. The challenge was rigged. They intended to not just make her fail, but to destroy Pixel and Bolt in the process. Mia's mind raced. If the interference was as intense as Xylar claimed, then the only way to protect Pixel and Bolt would be to shield them. But without the harnesses, how could she communicate with them? How could she guide them through the tunnels without any means of direction? An idea sparked in her mind, and she rushed to her desk, pulling open a drawer and retrieving a small metal case. Inside was a set of old Earth tools her father had given her before she left for the Academy. They were outdated and primitive compared to the Academy's advanced equipment, but they were simple, reliable, and, most importantly, impervious to electromagnetic interference. Mia grabbed a spool of insulated wire, a set of miniature clamps, and a small handheld transmitter. If she could create a basic communication device, something analog that didn't rely on electromagnetic waves, she might be able to send simple signals to Pixel and Bolt without risking interference. She worked through the night, her hands moving swiftly as she assembled the makeshift transmitter. It was crude and far from elegant, but it would work. Instead of a camera feed, she would use a series of vibration pulses to signal the rats 1 pulse for left, 2 for right, 3 for stop. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best she could do. When the device was finally assembled, Mia tested it on Bolt, placing the small receiver against his back. She activated the transmitter and sent a single pulse. Bolt twitched, his ears perking up at the sensation. Mia held her breath and sent 2 pulses. Bolt turned right, his tiny paws moving in response to the signal. Mia's heart soared. It worked. It actually worked. But then came the hard part, training them to respond to the signals without any visual guidance. Mia spent the next several hours running them through the training course, sending pulses and guiding them through the makeshift tunnels. The rats responded well, their sharp minds quickly adapting to the new system. But the real tunnels would be hotter, darker, and far more dangerous. The thought of sending them in there without her direct guidance made Mia's chest tighten. But she had no choice. This was the only way. The following morning, the training chamber was filled with cadets, all of them buzzing with excitement. Xylar stood near the front, his eyes gleaming as he whispered to the other students, each one sneering in Mia's direction. Xylox stood in the center of the room, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. A look of smug satisfaction etched into his features. "Cadets," Xylox announced, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Today's challenge will test not only your technical skills, but your resolve. The lower tunnels are fraught with hazards, extreme temperatures, electromagnetic interference, and unstable wiring. You will have 1 hour to complete the repairs. Any failure to do so will result in immediate disqualification." Mia took a deep breath, steadying her hands as she lifted Pixel and Bolt from the crate. She gently attached the receivers to their backs, her fingers trembling as she secured the straps. The rats remained calm, their small black eyes watching her with unwavering trust. "You can do this," Mia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're stronger than they know." When the challenge began, the room erupted in a frenzy of movement. Cadets scrambled to activate their robotic drones, the machines whirring and buzzing as they descended into the tunnels. Xylar's drone was particularly advanced, equipped with a reinforced shell designed to withstand extreme temperatures. Mia swallowed hard as she placed Pixel at the entrance of the tunnel. The heat radiating from the metal walls was intense, the air thick and suffocating. Mia activated the transmitter and sent a single pulse. Pixel moved forward, his small body disappearing into the darkness. The camera feed was blank. There would be no visual guidance this time. All Mia had were the vibration pulses and the hope that Pixel would remember his training. She watched the transmitter, her heart pounding as she sent 2 pulses. Right turn, 3 pulses. Stop. Minutes stretched into agonizing hours as Mia guided Pixel through the tunnel. Sweat dripped down her brow, her hands shaking as she strained to hear any sign of distress. In the distance, she could hear Xylar's laughter, his drone effortlessly navigating the tunnels, while Mia struggled to keep her connection with Pixel intact. Then a deafening crack echoed through the chamber. The screen flickered and the lights dimmed. A power surge. Mia's blood ran cold. "Warning," the automated voice echoed through the room. "Circuit overload detected in lower maintenance tunnels." Mia's hands flew to the transmitter, her fingers shaking as she sent rapid pulses. "Pixel, come back! Abort! Abort!" There was no response. Mia's throat tightened, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. If the surge had reached Pixel, then he was trapped, and Bolt was still waiting to enter. "Mia!" Xylar's voice echoed through the room, a cold, mocking drawl. "It seems your pets are as fragile as your methods. Perhaps it's time to admit defeat." Mia's jaw clenched, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Not yet," she said, her voice strong and steady. "Not yet." Without another word, she grabbed Bolt and placed him at the tunnel entrance. "Listen to me," she whispered, her eyes locked onto his. "Find Pixel. Bring him back. I believe in you." Bolt nuzzled her hand, then turned and disappeared into the tunnel, his small body swallowed by the darkness. Mia's hands hovered over the transmitter, her pulse pounding in her ears. This was it, the final test, the last chance to prove herself and to save her friends. Bolt moved through the tunnel with swift, determined steps, his small paws gripping the heated metal surface beneath him. The air was thick and stifling, each breath a struggle against the oppressive heat radiating from the walls. The electromagnetic interference crackled through the tunnel, sending erratic vibrations through the transmitter strapped to his back. Mia's heart hammered as she watched the small, blinking signal on her handheld device. It was the only indication that Bolt was still moving. Mia leaned forward, her face inches from the screen. Her eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot from hours of stress and strain. Every fiber of her being was focused on that single blinking dot, the only connection she had to Bolt. The room around her had fallen silent, all the other cadets having completed their tasks or given up. Xylar lounged nearby, a smug grin plastered across his face as he toyed with his own drone controller. Professor Xylar stood at the far end of the chamber, his forearms crossed over his chest, his expression blank but his eyes fixed on Mia. The satisfaction in his gaze was unmistakable. He had orchestrated this, every detail meticulously planned to crush her spirit and humiliate her in front of the entire academy. But Mia wasn't ready to give up, not yet. "Come on, Bolt," she whispered, her fingers hovering over the transmitter controls. "You can do this. Find Pixel and bring him back." Inside the tunnel, Bolt pressed forward, his tiny body shivering from the waves of interference pulsing through the metal walls. The vibrations made his fur stand on end, but he kept moving, sniffing the air and following the faint scent trail left behind by Pixel. The tunnel was a maze of tangled wires and exposed circuits, each one sparking dangerously in the suffocating heat. Bolt's ears twitched as he heard a faint, weak squeak echoing from somewhere up ahead. Pixel. The sound was muffled, distorted by the electromagnetic pulses, but it was unmistakable. Bolt quickened his pace, his small paws slipping on the slick, heated surface as he crawled deeper into the tunnel. Mia's eyes never left the screen. The blinking dot that represented Bolt moved closer to the red-marked section of the tunnel, the area where Pixel had been trapped. Sweat dripped down Mia's forehead, her knuckles white as she gripped the transmitter. The room was still, every cadet now watching her, some with curiosity, others with cruel anticipation. Bolt turned a corner, his eyes catching the faint, flickering glow of a sparking circuit. The air was thick with the smell of burnt wiring and the sharp tang of melted metal. And there, tangled in a mass of wires, was Pixel. Pixel's fur was singed in places, and his left paw was caught in a tight coil of wire. He struggled weakly, his small body trembling with exhaustion. Bolt hurried forward, his tiny teeth working quickly to gnaw through the wire trapping Pixel's paw. The metal was hot, burning his tongue and making his eyes water, but he refused to stop. Mia's heart clenched as she watched the dots on the screen converge. Bolt had reached Pixel. Now came the hardest part, getting them both out. "Come on, Bolt," Mia whispered, her voice thick with desperation. "You're almost there." Bolt managed to free Pixel's paw, and Pixel slumped against him, his breaths coming in shallow, labored pants. Bolt nudged him gently, pressing his nose to Pixel's ear. Pixel's eyes fluttered open, and he weakly pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily against Bolt for support. Mia's fingers flew over the transmitter controls, sending rapid pulses, 1 for forward, 2 for right, 3 for stop. Bolt responded instantly, guiding Pixel through the tunnel, one slow, agonizing step at a time. But then, without warning, the screen flickered and the signal cut out. Mia gasped, her eyes widening as the blinking dots vanished from the display. "No!" she cried, slamming her fist against the console. "Come on, Bolt! Pixel!" Professor Xylox's voice echoed through the room, dripping with false sympathy. "It seems your pets couldn't handle the challenge, Cadet Lee. Perhaps it's time to accept that Earth creatures are as useless as I said." Mia's jaw clenched, her eyes blazing as she glared at Xylox. "You don't know anything about them," she said, her voice shaking. "They're stronger than you think." She turned back to the screen, her hands trembling as she desperately tried to re-establish the connection. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one an eternity as she waited for any sign of life. The other cadets began to murmur among themselves, some exchanging pitying glances, others smirking in amusement. But then, a single, faint blip appeared on the screen. The signal was weak, barely registering, but it was there. Mia's breath caught in her throat as she watched the dot slowly inch forward, heading toward the exit. Bolt was still moving, and Pixel was with him. Mia's eyes filled with tears as she leaned closer to the screen, her entire body tense with anticipation. "Come on, guys," she whispered. "You're so close." The room fell silent as everyone watched the screen, the tension palpable. Even Xylar's smirk had vanished, his 3 eyes fixed on the display with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Bolt staggered forward, Pixel leaning heavily against him as they moved inch by inch through the tunnel. The heat was unbearable, the interference pulsing through the walls like a living, breathing entity. Bolt's legs trembled, his breaths coming in ragged gasps, but he refused to stop. Mia's heart pounded as she watched the blinking dot draw closer to the exit. "You're almost there," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Just a little more." And then, at long last, Bolt emerged from the tunnel, Pixel draped across his back, his eyes half closed but still alive. Mia rushed forward, tears streaming down her face as she scooped them both into her hands, cradling them against her chest. Bolt weakly nuzzled her thumb, his small body shivering with exhaustion. Pixel let out a faint squeak, his eyes fluttering open as he looked up at her. "You did it," Mia sobbed, pressing a kiss to each of their tiny heads. "You did it." The room erupted into whispers, cadets exchanging stunned glances as they watched Mia hold her tiny battered heroes. Xylar stood frozen, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Professor Xylax stepped forward, his eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "You may have survived this challenge, Cadet Lee," he said coldly. "But make no mistake, this proves nothing. You relied on brute luck and primitive creatures. There is no place for such methods in the Galactic Academy." Mia straightened, her eyes blazing as she met Xylox's gaze head on. "I didn't rely on luck," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I relied on courage, trust, and the belief that even the smallest creatures can do extraordinary things." Xylox's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a new voice echoed through the chamber. "Well said, Cadet Lee." Everyone turned as the Academy's head instructor, Commander Alaric, stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a long shadow across the room. His eyes shone with respect as he looked at Mia. "You've proven that true strength isn't defined by advanced technology or powerful machines," Alaric said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "It's defined by the heart and determination to succeed against impossible odds. And for that, you have not only passed this challenge, you have surpassed it." Mia's breath caught in her throat as the room filled with applause. Xylar scowled, his face flushed with anger, but he said nothing. Mia cradled Pixel and Bolt against her chest, her tears mingling with her smile as she whispered, "We did it." She glanced down at her two little heroes, their eyes closing as they drifted off to sleep in her hands, safe and sound. And as she stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the echoes of applause, Mia knew that she had not only proven herself, but had shown the entire academy what true strength really meant.